This week on TDL Synth Chat, we're going to be talking to Daniel from Chalkwalk Music. He's going to be explaining to us how he got into synthesis, his journey into music and sound design, and then his YouTube channel on synth sound design, including some brilliant instruments like the OP-6, MicroFreak, and how he got into doing that, and his methodology of doing sound design tutorials. We'll be talking about what gear he likes, with his software, hardware. We'll be talking about playing live and improv sessions and playing with others, and his philosophies on sound design as well. So I think you're going to really enjoy this. So let's get straight to Daniel. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Hi.
It's great to get you on the show, to meet a fellow synth enthusiast, and also not just a player but also content creator, sound designer, and so I've been watching quite a few of your videos. I think some of the Hydrasynth ones, and sort of the ones where you sort of make the sounds and people can follow along, and I do something similar with on the ModWave multipoly as well. So it was really interesting to see that kind of video. I really like that kind of style of video. I think it's really helpful. But we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about what got me interested in making that type of video. I feel like there are a lot of people making content that is very, very focused on a particular thing. The type of video that says, make a Drake type beat, or it says how to make a fat bass on the synth X. And my take has been that there are a set of generic skills that would be really useful for a lot of people to learn, and they're not necessarily all that complicated. So my approach has been to try and hopefully, in a straightforward and approachable and personable manner, present the things that I've learned and the challenges that I've faced in understanding how to design a sound and how to use a synthesizer in an effective way.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to come back to that. So just before we go into the details of that, just tell us a bit about you, where you're from, and how you got into music.
Oh, yeah, of course. So I was actually born and raised in London, and I went to university in Manchester, not related to music, but I've had a long-standing interest in music, I would say. As a child, I experimented playing the piano, but I would say I didn't really get as deep as I would like, and I would say I didn't get that deep because I ran into this barrier, which was there were too many magic recipes handed over to you. It's that, oh, the key of A has got 3 sharps. Well, why does it have 3 sharps? It's rote learning, and I didn't really enjoy that. So I would say in my mid-20s, I had another attempt at learning about music and learning how to play the piano, but also understand music and music composition. And I got a little bit further there, but I didn't really reach the goal. And when I crystallized that goal, it really pushed me forwards. And the goal was, I saw people jam, and I didn't even know what that was at the time. But what it meant to me was they came together, they had relatively little context, and yet they could make music together in a meaningful manner. So I wanted to understand how could they do that. So this was probably my early 30s. I started to learn music theory, and that was jazz piano. That was my focus there. So I wanted to be able to play from lead sheets, but also play improvisationally, because to me, that ability to improvise and to play in a group setting was an aspiration that I had. And for about 3 years, I think I practiced that. I worked on studying theory initially exclusively, then learning to play lead sheets, learning to improvise, learning about modes and about all of the things that come along with music theory. But I started to be interested in the concept of music performance and music production. And I experimented with my computer a little on music production, and that really pointed me at synthesizers. Now, I'd say I'd been interested in electronic music previously. It wasn't new to me, but the thought that I would be making music and electronic music, it hadn't really connected in my head. So you're probably talking about 10 years ago, I got interested in software synthesizers and eventually got a Base Station 2. That was my first synthesizer. And at the same time, I found a group of people locally who had a music improvisation, like electronic music improvisation group. And I guess I skipped it, but I moved to California. So this is in California now that I'm talking about. And the good thing about that group was it included some people who I would say are very experienced musicians and had been, performing on stage and composing professionally. And one of the people was a composition PhD. So these people are very experienced. But what it made me realize was musicians love to make music. And often they like to make music with new people, and they like to make music in new ways. So I suddenly realized that this barrier that I perceived, this sort of skill level that I thought I had to attain, didn't really exist in this context. So I got in there and I played regularly. It was just a monthly event for a couple of hours, and I really enjoyed that. And one of the aspects that I enjoyed especially was not just playing the keyboard, but live sound design. So adjusting all of the parameters while I'm playing. I got a pedal down with an ARP going, or I'm playing some other sequence. And that is the part that became increasingly compelling to me. So that's to say, I had a good vocabulary of music theory and chords and how to write, but I became more interested in using timbre as a performance feature. I participated in a few like open mic nights around the place. And one of the people that I was playing with in that group, they did a few shows, and I sort of played with them a little bit. But generally, I didn't really intend to become like a professional musician. I was interested in performance, and I was interested in going to these events and pushing myself, but not so much in having a sort of structured output. And I had another career independent of music, so I didn't really it didn't really make sense for me, I think. So I started doing a little bit more production. I had some friends that I'd met who did some like singing. We did a little bit of music together. So that was interesting. I definitely enjoyed that production side. But over time, I became increasingly interested in the process of sound design. And in particular, I mentioned I worked with or performed with a composition PhD. And one of the things that they told me, which kind of stuck with me, is one of the most important skills as a composer is audiation. The ability to hear a sound in your mind. It is the sound version of visualization. And when he talked to me about the way they learned ear training, they'd hear a series of chords and they would write out the notes for each voice. And what this facilitated for them was the inverse. They could then imagine the sound of a progression of chords, and then they could write it out. So they could do the opposite. And I think that is what connected for me. So I wanted to approach sound design in a similar manner. That is to say, to audiate a sound, to hear it in my head, and then use the technical skills on the synthesizer to create the sound that I wanted. And in fact, my approach to composition, it started leaning towards a method where often I'd put placeholder sounds in and play placeholder melodies and chord progressions. And then I would listen and I would try and hear in my head what I really wanted to be there. And then I would try and realize that on whatever synthesizer or by whatever means that seemed appropriate. And in doing that and in speaking to other people who made music, I found that a lot of people were somewhat intimidated by the thought of synthesis and sound design. That's to say, they were happy to go through presets, they were happy to find sounds that they liked for their purposes, but they felt like they didn't have the ability or the capacity to sound design, like sound design was some magic art. And in my mind, sound design is a discipline that you can learn just like anything else. But you need the right mindset. And in a sense, the wrong mindset and the inhibiting mindset that I had seen from people is they would try and randomly experiment with parameters to bring them to where they wanted to go. And this is viable, especially on a simple subtractive synth. Like, you can learn synthesis that way.
Yeah.
But as the synthesis method becomes more complicated, it becomes harder and harder to actually get to that end goal. So instead, you end up just tweaking a sound here and there. So I started making videos on YouTube mostly to share that thinking, that process that I like to follow in designing sounds, which are designed to order. They're designed for a particular purpose. They're not just the sound that you think, oh, that sounds good, I'm going to use that sound, but rather, I need X, I shall make X.
Yeah, that's a really good approach. When I create my sound packs, sometimes I have a similar thing. I can hear in my head what I want to achieve, and I go, okay, I've got this synth. Let's see how I can do that. And then you break it down by modules. You start with your oscillators maybe, and think, well, what's the basis of it, and then how do I want it to evolve, and then you finish it with your effects and stuff. So I think it's a good way of approaching sound design. And subtractive synth, a good synth to start, I guess, a base station too as well, because it's quite a focused synth, so it's not got a ton of stuff that makes it difficult to get started with.
Yeah, exactly. And interestingly, despite having had it for such a long time and having used it for so long, I would describe it as one of my favorite synthesizers. Like, it's something that it feels complex enough to get interesting sounds, but simple enough that you don't get bogged down. And I think there are a surprising number of synthesizers which on paper feel like they should be great, but you don't necessarily connect with them in the same way. And I think that comes down to sometimes with overloading them with features. And now, if you're an experienced sound designer, you can navigate that feature overload. But an inexperienced sound designer, it is difficult to have the discipline to focus on the individual areas that you need to focus on to get where you need to go.
And did you find then that, so you were sort of playing in these sort of improvised sessions and things, were you then preferring to do the sound design, or is it the sound design and the playing that sort of attracted to you?
The thing that I enjoyed was designing the sound live. So what I would do quite a lot of the time was create an init patch, and sometimes I just turn the filter down to make it a little less abrasive, but I would start with a very, very basic sound, and through the performance, I would design the sound, and I would design it in response to what everyone else does. And I think that's what improvised events taught me. It's that it is easy to think you should be playing and you should be doing all the things that you know how to do. But in practice, what you should be doing is listening and finding your niche and finding your space and finding the timbre that fits what's happening. And another thing I think I enjoy in those improvised settings is these individual tracks, so to speak. It might be 20 minutes long. So there's a lot of time for you to explore. And pre-COVID, this was all in person. We were all in the same room. We had a big set of monitors. And sometimes we had for the initial improvised sets that I talked about, sometimes we even had an audience, not really invited exactly, but we advertised that we were going to do this. So people would come and play, but people started to come and watch as well. But just having the people in the room and being able to just give someone a nod or look. When COVID hit, we actually had to switch to doing this online because we couldn't be in the same room. So we used Ninjam for that. And it came with its up and downsides, I would say. So for example, it was easy to get a nice multi-track recording, not necessarily the greatest quality, but if you wanted to isolate parts, you could all make your own mixes. And Ninjam is something I actually enjoyed a lot. When I heard about it and it says, oh, you're going to be playing, they will be hearing, say, 4 bars earlier than you played. There's this sort of time lag, and it sounds really confusing. It's like you're listening to what I played 4 bars ago, and I'm listening to what you played 4 bars ago, but somehow it just works. And the reality is it does work. If you think about it too hard, you get horrified by the prospect. But in practice, when you have a fixed set of chord changes, it's not all that difficult to do. And especially when you have a slow moving 20-minute long piece of music, it's surprisingly easy to do. And yes, it's harder to get that nice ending where you can build to a crescendo and you can nod in the room and everyone can stop. But as long as you're okay with it swelling and then flowing away again, I think that's acceptable.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. That, but I guess nothing beats, like you said, that sort of feel of everybody being in the room together, and you get some magic that comes from that.
Agreed.
So, what kind of music were you creating then, or is it just depending on who was in the group at that time you were doing it?
Yeah, it was very varied. I would say the people who we had there, kind of core members of that group. One of them had a digitact, so they would be making rhythm and they would be adding samples and things like that. So I think that gave us a good tempo key and something consistent, because generally, though we occasionally synced, sometimes what's it called, Ableton Link we used, sometimes just physical MIDI cables or other cables going across the room. But a lot of us were just playing live. Like one of the initial regular members played a Seaboard. The Seaboard, was it Rise? I can't remember. It was a standalone instrument, though. You didn't need a computer for it. No, sorry, you did need a computer for it. I misspoke there. But in any case, it was a sort of big instrument. It wasn't the blocks, the later one. And then we had someone else playing the Roland JDXI, and then I would play the bass station, or sometimes I'd play something else. But that was my go-to. And occasionally we had someone bring in a modular system. Someone brought in an original ARP 2600. So that was a fun one for us. Apparently, that had been out of action for about the previous 15 years, and they just found someone to repair it. So they brought that along. And they also played the wind instrument controller. So they would hook that up to other synthesizers. So occasionally they would play piano on a wind controller and all sorts of strange things. And the music we made, I think sometimes when we were a bit more up-tempo, it would fall into something techno-ish, I would describe it as. And then at slightly lower tempo, probably trip hop maybe is a word that's sort of relevant to it. And occasionally it would be a bit more ambient. And sometimes what we would do is we would sort of drift from something which was very tempo synced, and it would become more and more loose. And by the end, it could be very experimental. But the process I really enjoyed. Like I enjoyed the process of being able to constantly adjust the sounds that I was making and adjust effects and work with a set of people who were in the room. And the good thing for us was we had that core membership, and then different people would come and go. And the other people would bring different flavors in all the time. We actually tried using a live drummer once, but it was too difficult to get it balanced. We needed them to be off in a drum room somewhere, sending So we couldn't do that. So the digitact was where the percussion came from us. Occasionally we'd have people come with an Ableton push and they'd play off their laptop as well.
Yeah. So did that then sort of inspire you to do sort of your own music creation, your own music projects then?
I would say that inspired is definitely accurate, but I'd say beyond that, it made me feel like it was possible. I think that's the thing. I think that in a way I had pictured that the barrier to entry was high, and if you didn't start playing music when you were 5 years old, you're never going to be a great musician. But I'm 44 now, so I've been playing for a while, and I feel I can see the progression. I can see that I've become a better and more well-rounded musician now. And I guess I didn't mention, but I'm taking this call not from in my regular studio space, but from my workspace. And that's because I have two young children, and my studio room has gradually collected more and more junk that would otherwise be elsewhere. So I don't actually use my full setup very much presently, but I've set up another computer with a DAW on and some soft synths on. And I also stuck to a sort of a drawing board, a set of synthesizers to make a little portable setup. Well, I guess I can tell you what I've got on there. I've got a Squarp Pyramid to be the sequencer. There is a Volca drum for percussion. There is the Korg NTS1 as an extra voice or as an effect. There's a Sonicware, I think it's called Play. It's the keyboard-based Sonicware device with a whole load of different synth engines. And there is a Unosynth Pro desktop, and there is a Keystep on there. So between those things, I have something that I can pick up and move and I can place somewhere. And it gives me the ability to just make music, which I've enjoyed having, because I like working on the computer. Like, I think it gives you a lot of flexibility, but sometimes nothing beats a bit of a hardware instrument jam session.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I had the same thing. I had a little studio set up. Then the kids arrived, and the studio got elsewhere. And I had a couple of synths downstairs. But as my kids have grown up, I've got a bit more space now. All my stuff's back in here again now. So yeah. But it's nice to have that hardware as well as the software. So yeah, like you, I know some people are like, I don't want to use a DAW because I spend all day on the computer and whatever. I don't want to make music on a computer, but I actually do spend all day on the computer, and I like making music on a computer. But I also like having hardware as well. It's just nice to have the best of both worlds, really.
Yeah, I agree. And in terms of like using a DAW, I've been a long-time Linux user. I started using it as like my primary operating system in probably 99. So it's been over 25 years now that I've been doing that. And in a way that steered me towards my DAW choice, but I use Bitwig. I also have Reaper, which I do use sometimes. Reaper has some nice features to do with video. I've done some interesting experiments, and it has a nice ability to jog through the sound, and the sound will play forwards and backwards like you're moving a tape, and the video all moves with it. That's been excellent. But Bitwig has a huge amount of flexibility in terms of modulation, but also it's available natively for Linux. So it turned out to be a very good match for me. And it also worked quite well when integrating it with a hardware setup. Although I do have another hardware brain, so to speak, which is an MPC Live, which I bought when it was just released. It has some pretty interesting capabilities, like the ability to be a USB MIDI host, including supporting hubs, and you can connect audio interfaces to it. So I have a Soundcraft Signature MTK22, a fairly big mixer that can run into my MPC, and I get full multi-track audio in and out, but also it can run into the computer, and then I get the same support. So in terms of a hybrid setup using that as the center, it's worked really nicely for me.
And in terms of hardware, you mentioned a couple of things like the Pyramid and the MiniFreak. Are you sort of limiting yourself just to a couple of hardware devices just because you've not got the space to get loads of big key synths?
Yeah, I think I made a conscious decision in my studio space to try and set a constrained amount of space to put synthesizers. And the reason that I did that is I didn't want to sort of fall into a trap of more must be more. I need another synth. So the way that I've approached that is I constrained the space, And I said to myself, in order to add something, I have to take something away. And that attitude of saying that I can't just add, I need to replace. And if I say to myself that I need to replace, then it means that I have to think quite hard about any purchase decision. Now, I made a few exceptions to that, most notably when I got an Osmose. That doesn't really fit in that setup. And I've placed that presently in the living room with a really long active MIDI cable and audio cable that I can actually record from it, and some strange setup that I managed to do to allow myself to remotely trigger that. I've got a long video cable running, so I can actually, on the living room TV, see my computer, and I can record from that space. But other than the Osmose, I've been pretty good about sticking to my guns, so to speak, in not growing the setup. So a lot of my very early synth purchases, I mentioned the Bass Station and the Peak, another Novation synth. I've had that for a long time, and I like it very much. I think that it is a good balance of interface complexity, sound quality, and approachability and utility. Like, I think when people say workhorse synth, to me, that's a workhorse synth. Same with the Bass Station 2. The Bass Station 2, it's a workhorse synth. Like, I can sit down at it and I can make the lead sound or the bass sounds that I need, and I don't need to think too hard. I think in terms of synthesizers hardware that maybe I don't utilize as much as I thought that I was going to. One of them is the Hydrasynth. I like the Hydrasynth. I like its engine. I like its approach to sound design. But for one thing, it doesn't work all that well for live sound design. And when I say live sound design, I mean create an init patch, play the keys while designing it, because it doesn't have that many controls on the front panel. So though it manages the complexity really, really well, like it really manages the complexity, but the knobs just aren't there to do what I want. So I'm always having to go into a menu, go to the next page, adjust something, and it never really felt that fluid to me. The OP-6 is another one I put in that category. And the OP-6, the reason I put it in that category is it's a tremendously powerful and featureful synth. And the capacity for designing sounds you just won't hear anywhere else is really great. I think it's an excellent synthesizer. But what I have found is when I want a synthesizer that does anything, I go to software. So I can load up Zebra, I can load up Pigments, I can load up Phase Plant. You know, these things have unbelievable capabilities, and I can do what I want with them. And in fact, more than those, the grid in Bitwig, like a modular patching environment for both audio and MIDI, those allow me to do anything. The OP-6 allows me to do very many things, but there are trade-offs in it being in its dedicated box. So I think for me, what constitutes a win of a synthesizer is a synthesizer, I've described it as it's opinionated. It has a certain way of doing things, and you either do it that way or you're not going to get on with a synthesizer. I want it to be opinionated. I'd rather it be narrow in scope to push me in a certain direction, because if I want all the options in the world, I have software which gives me all the options in the world. So I want the synthesizer to do one thing, and it doesn't have to be the best at that thing, but it has to connect with me and the way that I like to work.
Yeah, connecting is definitely really important. It was interesting you mentioned the OP-6, because I've got the ModWave, the Multipoly, and the Wave State, and I love creating sounds on those. I haven't got the OP-6 because I kind of run out of space, but I did get the plug-in version, and I just didn't get on with it like I got on with the others. And I wonder whether it's because I've not got the hardware, just those sliders and knobs in interacting with it, or whether it's just it's just the engine is not how I would like to work. I don't know. It's interesting to see Is it
Yeah,
hardware or is it software?
yeah. I think that it is a very particular engine, and I think the way that it was marketed as like FM plus was a disservice to it, because while it is a synthesizer capable of FM, it is a synthesizer that can do far more than FM. And like the filter models that it has, like the other synthesizers in the same range, I think they all sound pretty great. And the effects are quite nice. And they're definitely well thought out. But there is a much more structured way of thinking that you need to apply to design sounds on the OP-6. And I think that works okay in a software setting. But I think one of the things that people who like the OP-6 like about it that are not very deeply into sound design are that you can load up an FM patch and you can just tweak the levels from the faders, or you can tweak the ratios from the faders. And it gives you that capacity of a subtractive synth that you would have of just load up the patch, tweak the cutoff a bit, and you got a different sound. Just very direct and easy ways of manipulating. Yeah. Whereas the OP-6 doesn't feel like it has those easy, it has some of the easy tweaks that most FM synths don't feel like they have.
Yeah, just perhaps I should give the software version another try, because I do love the other ones, and I like programming on FM. I've got a TX7, and I'm quite happy delving into FM programming through the editor. Not well, you can't edit the TX7 on its own, but I'm not really into. I've got a DX100, and I don't really like sound design on that too much. But you put it in the editor, and it's nice. You can get some good stuff. Although that was the only synth I had for a long time when I was a kid, and that was, you could only do it through that 2-line display. So having a PC screen, I'll take that over. I know people love the DAW stuff, but I'll take it having to only use the 2-line displays in the past.
I think interestingly though, an FM synth that I've enjoyed is another Sonicware synth, the Liven XFM, and that only has a 1-line display. And it has, and it's like the 7-segment display. So it's got 5 characters on it. So it's an extraordinarily limited display. But it has 2 modes. It has the sort of Groovebox mode and the FM sound design mode. And you put an overlay on the panel for FM sound design. So then what you get is a lot of dedicated controls to do your sound design. So I've actually enjoyed using that quite a lot. And because it's 4-operator, it constrains you a little bit more, and it lets you work a little bit more quickly. Because when I think about FM sound design, when I think about sound design in general, actually, I tend to choose a starting point, a simplified form of what is available, and then grow from there. So in a subtractive synth, I think, like you said, we just start with an oscillator and we get the timbre we want there as best we can. And then we bring in the filter, and then we bring in the envelopes, and that, we step through and get closer and closer to what we want. With an FM synth, what I would tend to do is start with one operator that's just a carrier, get that shaped as close as I can, and then ask myself, do I want another layer in parallel? And then I want another carrier, or do I want more timbral motion? And then I add another modulator. And what that requires is not to have to pick an algorithm up front. And I think for me, having the user algorithms really lowers the barrier to entry for FM synthesis, which is interesting because I think a lot of people consider user algorithms an advanced feature. But from my perspective, it's not an advanced feature because it allows you to just start with one operator and then decide, do I need more modulation? Or do I need another layer of sound?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because if you're starting from scratch on a DX7 or the DX100, you've got to think, right, okay, do I want 2 pairs of in parallel, or do I want lots of modulation? Right, no, I'm going 2 pairs. You've got to make that decision up front. But exactly. The user algorithm, gives you that option deciding later, which I think is really good, actually.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I wish the OP-6 did differently, which is it tried to be an algorithmic synth in the style of the DX7, And that made the user algorithms a second-class citizen. So you have to jump into a menu and go somewhere, and then you're at user algorithm edit, and then you have to go back again to do what you were doing. For me, I think if they brought that to the fore and made it primarily user algorithms, then I would have got on with it a lot better. And I think it would really be a go-to synth that I would always use. But as it stands, it sort of doesn't quite hit that sweet spot for me, which is a shame. Whereas the Sonicware Liven, it is a much less good sounding synth at its core. You know, it's a much more lo-fi, crunchy sort of thing. And, you know, that can be an asset in certain circumstances. But my thinking is always, if you start with something pristine, then you can always make it more grungy and gritty. But if you start with something gritty, it's really hard to make it pristine.
Yeah, it's good ways of thinking, and like you said, it's a different way of thinking when you come to FM. You start with the basic shape. That's a good way of describing it, and then try and add the complexity. I've been working on wave shaping on the multi-poly, and that you do differently. So you don't do subtractive. You do the opposite. You kind of get a basic patch and then start to get that waveform more complex to flesh out the sound. So it's the different ways of working are interesting.
And I think when I've spoken to people about FM synthesis, I've said that, you know, you can think of the modulator as being like a filter on a subtractive synth. The difference is that it also adjusts the timbre. And then you could think of adding another modulator as having, say, a wave shaper as well. So you've got your carrier, which is your core oscillator, and the motion of the modulator is like moving a filter, and the motion of the second modulator can be almost like moving a wave shaper. But these are the layers of motion that you have access to. And I think those layers are compelling.
Yeah. And this is the kind of thing that you talk about on your YouTube channel, isn't it?
Yeah. I try my best to talk in an accessible way, but more than just moving the knobs and saying, oh, that sounds good. I try and motivate what I do. I try and talk about, I'm trying to do the following thing, and this is the reason that I turn the knob that I turn. And my conceptual process, I would say, is listen, think, change, repeat. That's the sort of process. So listen to where I am, think about what I have in my head, and think about, from my technical understanding of the synthesizer, how do I move towards it? Then I change while listening, and then I move on to the next step. And I think that think step that I mentioned there is something that can be missing in these randomized approaches to designing the sound. People just have a go-to pattern that they follow. And it can sound complicated, but I think the barrier to entry is surprisingly low, but you just need to take the time to conceptualize it. So I keep hoping that in my YouTube channel, I can inspire people to take a more structured and principled approach to learning synthesis, to then allow them the expression and the breadth of expression that synthesizers can really give you.
And so what synths do you currently cover on your channel?
I have been trying in some recent videos to not actually be synth focused, but rather sound design focused. So in terms of synthesizers, I've got a relatively big educational series on the OP-6, on the Hydrasynth, on the MicroFreak, and I've got a few one-off videos on the Peak and on I can't even remember what else, but there are a few of them out there. But what I've attempted to do is to create some series focused on the abstract of sound design. One of them I called Sound Design Here Creates, where I basically make a prompt for myself and sort of encourage people to follow along if they're interested. And then I try and make sounds or music to meet that prompt. So an example, I got a video of a pick and place machine, a robot that makes surface mounted PCBs. and then I designed the sounds of what I thought the motions should sound like. And I made the video where all the sounds are sounds that I've generated through synthesis, or in that case, I did some sampling. So I sampled an electric drill and a few other things. But I think that was a challenging process. And another one, I made a piece of music to go along with a flower blooming. So I wanted a blooming and then wilting, actually, so it wasn't just the bloom. And again, it gives me a good concrete point of inspiration to work from. And another series that I did, which I enjoyed a lot, but I haven't really had a good time to delve into it further, I called Patch Tennis, where me and someone else have two different synthesizers, and we design a sound and set it to video and send it to the other person, and they make their own sound to try and go with the same video, and then they send something back to me. And my hope in those is that it's fun, but also it illustrates the thought process that goes into designing sounds.
And I guess it's a challenge, isn't it, to maintain a channel like that and to come up with new ideas. I do the similar things on my channel, and constantly trying to think of new video ideas for the next set. Because as soon as you have an idea, you do it, and then you've got to think of something else straight away.
Yeah, I think the struggle that I've had is that my most successful videos are videos that are referential to a specific thing on a specific synth. And those are the ones I'm least invested in.
Yes.
So some of my most successful ones are really almost like a throwaway video that I did. I was like, oh, the new firmware on the MicroFreak came out. I'll just do a quick video, one take, 15 minutes. And it's tremendously popular. And you have some other video that you've really dedicated a lot of time to and put a lot of thought into, and it's much less successful.
Yeah, I think we've all, anybody that makes videos on YouTube's had that. I've certainly had that one, a throwaway one that gets loads of views, and if you'd realised, you would have spent a bit more time on it, but you just didn't anticipate it. And other ones you spend ages on, and you do all the research, and then they don't get the same amount of views as the throwaway. You just, yeah, I think it's you can be lucky sometimes or unlucky depending on how it goes.
Yeah,
I think it's difficult as well attracting. There's so much content out there. It's difficult attracting viewers to watch a video without resorting to clickbaity titles, and I'm never that keen on doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I'm very much averse to doing that type of thing. And in fact, I have a sort of principle when browsing YouTube, where if the thumbnail and title of any video is too clickbaity, even if I think it's going to be interesting to me, I don't watch it. I just am against it on principle.
Now, the other thing you mentioned when we were chatting before recording is you've done some sort of hardware projects as well, haven't you? Like sort of DIY sort of projects. There was a controller and some of the stuff you've worked on.
Yeah. So I would describe myself as having pretty diverse interests, and I like exploring new domains. And as well as I mentioned, interested in jamming and how that works, I've always been interested as well in electronics and how electronic devices are built. So I decided to spend some time learning a bit about electronic engineering. And on the whole, I don't like doing things by halves. So rather than just have a little breadboard that I experimented with, I designed a couple of Eurorack modules with, I fully laid out the PCB and got them manufactured and those type of things. And they were only for me. I didn't intend to have them anywhere out there as a product that anyone could buy. But one of them I think is quite interesting. So maybe I'll describe it a little bit. What I had a concept for was, I like the idea of Euclidean rhythms. I think they're a good way of discovering rhythms in a certain space that fit in a certain time. But what I wanted was a way to generate a family of related rhythms. So what the module has is it has a clock input and an internal clock, and it has 4 outputs. And those outputs have differing note densities. So just like most Euclidean rhythm generators, you can control how many beats long the rhythm is, and you have a control for the density, but the density means that the most dense output is scaled differently from the least dense output. So from a performance perspective, it means that imagine you send the most dense output to a hi-hat, the least dense output to a kick, and one of the middle ones to a snare or a clap sound. You can sweep the density control and it will still be in musical time and it will still have this Euclidean rhythm vibe to it, but you can control it in real time in a safe way. And I think from a performance perspective, having a knob that you can turn that you feel safe to turn is very important. And I think I had another one which could sort of shift back and forwards in time, and it would shift the different outputs different amounts. So the most dense one would actually shift the least, and the least dense one would shift the most. But it was very interesting from a performance perspective to be able to do that. And it was also quite compelling to make a piece of hardware. I actually have a book somewhere with a whole load of different designs that I've sketched out that I've never really had the time to turn into an actual, module fully laid out. But interestingly, that one that I completed was microcontroller centered, whereas the majority of the other ones that I designed was more or less analog with ICs which were not microcontrollers. So one of them was a sort of shift register that you could use for sending things through. I had quite a few of these designs, many of which I breadboarded. But on the whole, I actually tried to avoid microcontrollers because I didn't want to turn a hardware problem into a software problem. That's how I would describe it.
Yeah.
There's a temptation to do that. So I try my best to focus on the analog domain because I wanted to learn about electronics in doing it.
And that, were you then tempted to sort of build these modules and start to build up a Eurorack system, with your modules and perhaps buying other ones in?
So I have a little system that's got some of my things and some other things and some breadboards sitting in front of it for things which I designed but didn't really complete. I think the thing that Eurorack did for me that was good is it gave me a platform which was completely disconnected from playing the piano. I think one thing that can happen is when you're a piano player, every problem looks like a problem to solve on the piano. And that's not always the case.
Yeah, and I suppose when you get into analog sequencing, then you get sort of into the early Tangerine Dreams type stuff, and you can get away from traditional keyboards. You can get to some really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and in a way, the Osmose is something that brought me not a non-keyboard interface, but it allowed me access to some expression that I'd been looking for. Because I think one of the things that I enjoyed about live sound design is it allowed me to create new types of expression. And I did them by turning the knob or moving the mod wheel or using the aftertouch, but it was still something different, something that you wouldn't ordinarily expect from a keyboard type instrument. The Osmose gives you a completely new set of expressive dimensions while still feeling like a piano keyboard to play. Because when I tried the Seaboard, it was very cool. The person I mentioned who played it was a guitarist originally, so they were, I think, very adept at the bends and the vibratos with those. But the silicone surface had this strange fleshy feel that I didn't really enjoy all that much. The Osmose doesn't feel like that at all. And interestingly, I think the Osmose has increased my use of the Hydrasynth, because to me, the Hydrasynth's poly aftertouch is good, but it doesn't have the extreme sensitivity of the Osmose. So what the Osmose actually does when used as a controller is you suddenly have a really subtle and sensitive playing surface. So for making pad type sounds, for example, the key initial travel can be opening the VCAs. So you have really, really fine-grained control over how the sounds. So as an MPE destination, the Hydrasynth has actually been really, really great to use with the Osmose. It wasn't something I had expected in it.
No, that's interesting. I've got a key stage that's got poly aftertouch, and actually, when you use other keyboards, I actually miss the poly aftertouch because you can quite quickly get used to being able to apply that, even if it's for LFOs or, like you said, opening filters. But combine it with something like on the wave state, you can get it to change samples and stuff like that. You can get some really interesting stuff with sort of that, and the Osmosis takes that a step further than the key stage, I think.
In fact, the Osmose, one of the things I found quite compelling about it was the arpeggiator, because the expressive dimensions can control arpeggiation parameters. So, for example, you move a key to the side a little bit and it will ratchet that key when it plays through the ARP sequence, or you press it down and the velocity goes up. But if you go into the second phase of the aftertouch, it plays up an octave. So there's a lot of subtlety there. And in fact, I guess that's a slight segue into maybe a slightly contentious field, which is AI and its uses in music. Personally, I'm not super into using AI to make music. Like I'm not really that into that. But as a tool for empowering you to do things that you wouldn't otherwise have the time to do, I've been quite interested in it. And I haven't really talked about it, but I had an idea for an arpeggiator that could create chord progressions and sequences through this sort of arpeggiation. And having used the Osmose and the MPE that brought, I thought there's some really compelling things that you could do here. So I experimented, but did not release, using AI to make a piece of software as a sort of test bed, with the intention that when I get the time, I will go and write this thing from scratch. But as a mechanism for me to have this test bed for experimenting with this, I was pleasantly surprised. And to take it even further, a lot of the time I spent on this, I was when my children were young, they were asleep, I was on my phone. So I was writing this application. And when I say writing, I know when people picture AI, they imagine you write a sentence and it comes up with an application. But in practice here, I had about a 4,000 word design that went into making this. And probably about 10% of the code is code that I had to write myself. And often the bits you write are the really critical bits. And when programming, a lot of it is boilerplate, it's fluff, anyone could have written it. And there's certain kernels of things where you really need to get it right. And I think, probably 10% of it. But the reality is that the proof of concept that I made would not have existed without access to AI tools. And I'm hoping that a appropriate balance will be found in terms of using people's content for training data and for not taking away from the hard work that people have put in. Like I'm hoping that we can find a place where we can all feel comfortable that the AI was created and trained in a responsible manner, and that you can feel good about using it. Because as it is, there's this sort of mixed feelings and a bit of a bad taste in your mouth, which is part of the reason why I didn't really put that out there, and I just kept that as something for me to use.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like all tools, they've got they can be. It depends on how you use them, whether they're good or bad. And I've been using AI for show notes and timing, breaking down times on videos. It saved me an immense amount of times where I used to manually put all the tags in. That's great, but I wouldn't then use it for creating some music or something. You just use it for what's appropriate.
Yeah, and I think that's the trick here. It's that a lot of the bad impressions that people have about it are the thought that you just type in, do this big complicated thing for me, and it required no skill on your part. And the reality is the current generation of AIs, they are not good enough to do that. They can't completely take the work away. What they can do sometimes is they can help you with the grunt work, the work where you'd have sat there for an hour grinding through something, and suddenly it turns it into a 1-minute task. And I guess it's my hope that both me and other people around me will find the right use cases where this becomes a multiplier to your creativity and productivity and not a replacement. Because I think that's the fear. People are afraid that the skill and the creativity will get taken away and will be the domain of the machines. And I don't think anyone really wants that to be the case. But
no.
I think if you use it right, it can be something that really empowers you in a situation. Like I said, I wrote the whole thing on my phone. There is no way I was going to have written, 2,000 lines of code on a phone. It just was never going to happen. So it allowed me to do something I couldn't have otherwise.
So, couple of things I want to mention before we finish. So what's the sort of the next thing that you're working on? What have you got upcoming?
What have I got upcoming? So I have had a concept for a set of video series, first covering like beginner synthesis, then intermediate synthesis, then advanced synthesis, all using free software and all using only software synthesizers. Hopefully, once I complete those 3 series, I can launch into another sound design challenge based project where I'm hoping that I can get more participation from other people involving themselves, and I can challenge myself to push the work that I do to another level. I guess I haven't mentioned my YouTube channel. Chalkwalk Music is my YouTube channel.
Yeah, I'll make sure I include a link to that in the description so people can follow it. And you've also got some music on Bandcamp and SoundCloud?
Yeah, so I do have a bit, but the reality is I'm not actively putting out any music at the moment, mostly because I don't really have the time to do it. And where I do have time, I would much rather go to a venue and perform with some people that I know, and it just be an ephemeral moment that we get to enjoy, rather than some extended project to put the music out. Yeah.
Well, it's been brilliant chatting to you. Some really good ideas there. You've got some good ideas especially on the FM synthesis side. So I think I might go back to my OP-6 plugin and have another go with that, because I think I think your idea around the custom algorithms is a great one. So I'm going to definitely look at that. I'll include a link to the videos as well, your channel in the descriptions as well. Anyway, it's been really good. Really enjoyed chatting to you, and I think you've got a brilliant channel, and I definitely recommend people checking that out. No matter what synthesizer you've got, like you said, it's not specifically one synth. It's just that those ideas behind synthesis and the tutorials are great.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for having me today. I've enjoyed talking to you immensely. I'm a great fan of talking music tech, and talking in general. So thanks for allowing me.